and a further 200,000 were taken prisoner. Almost all of the Soviet equipment committed to the battle was either destroyed or abandoned. The battle was a disaster for the Red Army, comparable to the great defeats of the first year of the war. The whole of their southern wing had been shattered. Large sections of the line were now held by skeleton formations or by units cut off from their command and communications posts. For the Germans, the battle had been a far greater success than even they realized. Having removed the Kharkov salient, they now stood ready to mount a further strike into the south, unaware of the extent to which the forces facing them had been fundamentally weakened. Indeed, at the beginning of June, the wide expanses of the Don Steppe and the Caucasus lay virtually undefended. For Hitler, the conquest of Russia was an overriding priority. If Germany was to survive and prosper, she would need to achieve self-sufficiency in food, fuel, and raw materials. These would have to be won by force of arms and incorporated within an ever-expanding Reich. Only in Russia could he find such resources in sufficient quantity to free Germany of all external dependencies. In fact, Hitler's plans for Russia flew in the face not only of all common morality, but also of common sense. Territorial conquest was to be followed by a ruthless program of Germanization, in which subject populations would be reduced to serfdom or exterminated. In much of Western Russia, where the German invaders were initially welcomed as liberators, this was to breed resentment and defiance. In the unconquered territories to the east, it merely strengthened resolve. In earlier campaigns, the General Staff had been able to exert a restraining influence, curbing, though not controlling, Hitler's extravagance. But with each great victory, their influence had declined as his confidence had soared. Convinced that his superior intuition was an adequate substitute for generalship, he increasingly interfered in operational planning and in the ongoing control and direction of campaigns. By 1942, he had assumed the post of Commander-in-Chief of the Army, in addition to his other offices as Führer, Supreme Commander of the Armed Forces and Minister of War. This was a position of immense power, unfettered by considerations of moral accountability. Yet in the East, his plans and perceptions were colored by cruel prejudices and pathological hatreds. In them lay the seeds of disaster. By 1928, Stalin had emerged as Lenin's heir and the undisputed master of Russia. Suspicious, vindictive and cruel, his ascendancy to power marked the beginning of a period of wholesale repression, during which the apparatus of the state would be gradually extended into every facet of Soviet society. In the 1930s, he embarked upon a program of rapid industrial development, increasing armaments production and expanding the Red Army. In 1937, with these processes underway, he initiated a series of purges of the Red Army's officer corps, simultaneously extending political surveillance and control of the army through the commissariat and the secret police. These measures, while massively increasing the army's peacetime strength, gravely undermined its operational effectiveness and profoundly damaged morale. An indifferent performance in 1939 against the Finns was inevitably followed by a catastrophically inept defense against the Wehrmacht. In July, while German armies were slicing virtually unopposed through Western Russia, he assumed overall command of the Soviet armed forces. As Supreme Commander, Stalin enforced a rigid policy of no retreat, resulting in the greatest series of military disasters in history. With the onset of winter, he regained the initiative, but by overcommitting his few reserves, failed to capitalize on the exhaustion and disarray afflicting the Wehrmacht. By the spring of 1942, he had squandered more than 6 million lives, yet appeared neither distressed nor despondent. Stalin's authority was by now based almost entirely on fear. Thousands of Red Army officers had already been shot for disobedience, desertion, or treason. Those that remained knew that their lives depended on operational successes, and that they alone would bear responsibility for failure. Hitler's campaign in Russia had not only gravely overextended the Wehrmacht, it had placed huge strains on Germany's industry and dislocated her economy. Interim measures were taken to streamline production and ensure the continuing flow of supplies to the front. But the underlying problem remained. Germany's resources were simply inadequate to the prosecution of a long war. In the planning of Barbarossa, Hitler had established clear objectives. The capture of Leningrad would secure the Baltic and connect Germany to her Finnish allies. Control of the Moscow region would ensure German dominance of the road and rail infrastructure and deprive the Red Army of its communications system. But it was in the south that the great economic prizes were to be won. The grain fields of the Ukraine would be the breadbasket of the new Reich. The mineral wealth of the Donbass and the oil fields of the Caucasus would provide the necessary resources and raw materials to wage war indefinitely. In the event, the offensive had fallen far short of its aims. The repulse before Moscow had been perhaps the greatest military setback, but it was the failure in the south that most concerned Hitler. Although the original objectives of Barbarossa still remained valid for any future conquest of the Soviet Union, Hitler knew that his armies were too weak to achieve them all in a single year. Immediate priority had to be given to the south. Only by securing this fertile and economically rich region could he be assured of the means to continue the war. In April, he outlined his plans for the main campaign of 1942. This would be codenamed Plan Blue and would take the form of a two-pronged offensive. The overall objectives of Blue would be the destruction of the Red Army's southern front, The consolidation of the Ukraine, west